You're listening to Radigan's Rockcast, a series focused on talking about music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even current. Now, here's your host, Tom Radigan.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to Radigan's Rockcast. Whether it's on WMYO, YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Amazon Music, Castos, wherever you are on, I am glad you are on. Now let's begin. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the Beatles' fifth studio album, which is Help. And this, of course, is one of my favorite albums of theirs. Now this is, I will say, still their early phase and still their Beatles for Sale and even Hard Day's Night phase. It's got a mix of those albums into this. Hard Day's Night being of their own songs that become more mature and more sophisticated. And then, of course, they've got a few covers like Beatles for Sale, but not as much as Beatles for Sale. They have only two covers on this, which is Ringo's song on this, Act Naturally, which is a Buck Owens song, and Larry Williams' Dizzy Miss Lizzy, which is at the end that John sings. So let's talk about Help and what was going on at the time of the Beatles' popularity. So it's 1965. The Beatles were already so big when they came on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. They were the biggest stars. Nothing was bigger at this moment. They were it. They were the stars. They were just as big as Elvis, even bigger, in a sense. And John was having a little bit of a hard time dealing with this fame of all these fangirls screaming at them, and just this whole type of the idea of fame itself, of what it means, just all these people knowing who he is. And it was a lot of pressure on him. He realized he couldn't go out anymore in public in the way he once did, and all that stuff. So he wrote this kind of autobiographic kind of song, or this statement of what was going on at this time. He said that he was going through, he was going through his Fat Elvis stage, which he calls it. Because it's funny, because John Lennon, I would say, was never really a heavy guy. He never really got really heavy, but he does look a little like he put on weight in between from 63 to 65 in a sense. He talks about that he was drinking a lot more, eating a lot more, and it was just because he was so depressed of what was going on. And he wrote help about that. When I was younger, I never needed that much help in any ways. And so it's really, and he calls it, I think, one of his best songs, compared to with Strawberry Fields and Imagine, in a sense like that. This is one of his true songs, because John talked about a lot of songs that he did not like throughout the years, and we'll get to that because there are a few that are on this album that he did not like. But Help, is one of the few songs that he was really proud of still, until his death, So, that was something as well. So of course it's the start of the album. And it was their fifth album. It was actually their second film too, because A Hard Day's Night had a film, Help had a film. Now everybody talks about Hard Day's Night, how it was such a funny film and so comedic and all that, and then everybody says Help wasn't that good as a film, and I disagree. I think Help was just as good as Hard Day's Night. It had their I think what was great about the Beatles comedy when they were acting, in a sense, is they were the Marx Brothers, or when the Marx Brothers comedy, it's just silly comedy that just, it's almost in a sense, it's inside jokes that we're able to even understand as time goes on, if you see their interview process. And one thing I've always found funny about the film, this is a little bit off topic because we're going to be talking more about the album, but the film does have some stuff that relates to the album. I mean, it had 7 songs featured from the album on the film. It didn't have any of the covers, and it only had the first 7 songs, from Help to Ticket to Ride, and all that. But it's funny too, because there's a scene when they're going to the Bahamas, and they all look a little bit older. And the funniest thing is, they all ended up looking like that. That's exactly how they looked when they aged. It's kind of weird in a sense too. But another funny thing about that, with Help too, is that they were getting with these movies. I think it was they enjoyed the first one, but they were getting bored with the second one. They just felt stories weren't going anywhere. So they would ask the writers to add scenes for certain things they want to do. For instance, the scene where they have the song Ticket to Ride playing where they're skiing. They want to go skiing and all that stuff. So they just added that in the film and all that stuff. And, yeah, no, I mean, I think, and this album, I would say, is more of a fun record. It's definitely, like I said, it definitely still carries the early Beatles roots. So, without further ado, why don't we go in and talk about the songs on this album? So, we already mentioned a little bit about Help, so we'll get to a few other songs on this album. So, let's get the big hits out of the way, and then we'll talk about, the songs that are maybe not as well known and stuff like that. So, we'll talk about Ticket to Ride next, which was their other big hit that was from this album. Ticket to Ride, tells a story about a girl that's going away and all that stuff, and, the guy isn't crazy about her. I always loved this song as a kid. I still love this song. I think it's one of the most catchiest tunes and all that, and the catchiest chorus. And, it definitely is a hook, especially with the opening guitar riff. The chorus is a hook and all that stuff. It's very, and the harmonies between John and Paul. This has always been one of my favorite John songs, and all that too. We talked about Ticket to Ride. And then, of course, we've got a song that is not in the movie, and people might forget it's on the album, but it's known as one of their best songs of all time, which is Yesterday. Yesterday, of course, I think, in my opinion, of course, is a great song, too. It's funny, because my father always, never thought of it as their great love song. Now, I don't think it's like I've mentioned, I think, Paul McCartney's And I Love Her is better than Yesterday, in a sense, but Yesterday is still a great song. And the funniest thing is, it's not even all the Beatles. It's just Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney wrote this after, having a dream and all that stuff, and he, didn't have any words for it, so he just put it at the moment, scrambled eggs. And he was like, scrambled eggs, oh baby, how I love your legs. And, he was, trying to figure out where he heard this tune before. And he was asking John, he was asking, George Martin, he was asking everybody he knew of where is this tune? And nobody knew, so he decided to, say, it's mine. And, so he did it himself, and Brian Epstein, who's the manager of the Beatles, did a smart decision because he did not feel that, because George Martin thought that maybe we should just release this as a solo project with Paul McCartney, and Brian Epstein thought, we never separate the Beatles. We always put the Beatles together, which was a good idea because they never really did separate and did solo albums when they were together. I mean, later on too, but we'll get more into that as well. But not as much. It was and they all had their chance when they did a song without the rest of the guys on it. Paul had a few of those songs where he would just play with the guitar, and in this case, he had, an orchestral arrangement, too, on that. I've always thought it was a beautiful song. I thought the lyrics were great. Of course, the Beatles version is the best because, Paul McCartney's talked about that, too, about how, a lot of people covered Yesterday. It was one of the songs that was covered the most from the Beatles too, out of the Beatles catalog, which was Sinatra, I think Ray Charles, Marvin Gaye, and Elvis, of course. And the funniest thing is how Paul McCartney talked about, and he addressed it in an interview with Stephen Colbert 2 years ago, about how when you hear a version like Sinatra or Elvis, they always go when the line is "I said something wrong," they say "I must have said something wrong." Paul McCartney's big joke say they're not owning up. And which is kind of funny in the sense that of how he realized of how, because that's how he did the song, and if you think about it, you do change the meaning of how sorry you are of what it is, and I think the words just are mature and all that stuff, and it was definitely, of course, a change in their style, definitely with the orchestral sound. And the best thing I've loved about the song is the ending when he just does the humming at the end, the it's just so it just shows you it's like a mic drop almost, just yeah. It almost even in Louis Armstrong, it's almost like when in the song "A Wonderful World" with Louis Armstrong, how he goes oh yeah, like just that way, just like a signing off, and I think that works. Like, is it my favorite Beatles song of all time? No, but I definitely do have different opinions with my dad about it. I do still think it's a good song. I don't have anything really against it. My dad always just thought it was like, not like an understatement of other songs that he did. They did that was better. I mean, my dad and I have disagreements of what we think of better Beatles songs, because I have some songs that he thinks are one of their better songs, and I think, no, this song is better, or no, this was not as good, or I don't understand what people think about this song, or I don't understand why people talk about that song as much. But so now we're talking more about the album tracks that were maybe not as much of a hit and all that stuff, but songs like The Night Before, which is the second song on the album, which is a Paul song and all that. And the backing vocals from George and John are on that. The piano work is good. I like how they do that scene in the film, too, with the song. It's definitely a song that's very much of a rocker. It's got that, it's in the mix between, it's definitely that type of rock song. I always loved listening to that song as a kid. It was always one of my favorite Beatles songs, listening to it as a kid, because it was a song that, you never heard a lot. And when it would come on the radio, it would be like, oh, you know that? And when you hear the piano, like the bum, bum, it's like, oh, that's The Night Before. It's got to be. I think the thing that's interesting, about Help and all that stuff is just how, much of of an ending of their first, because I feel like this is the end of their first phase of music in a sense, because, they were already grown, they were already a successful band, but they were still playing into the roots of the early days and all that stuff. And even with these new mature songs, they still had that kind of poppy sound in this. So it's kind of a bittersweet album in that sense, because then we go into, of course, their other stuff, but then, of course, you realize, too, the Beatles catalog, in a sense, what was, even though, of course, they were around for most of the 60s and released 12 studio albums, of course, fans would always want more with them. So, it's sad as we move on into the catalog to talk about, because we've already gone through 4 of the Beatles albums addressing them. So, but the thing is, I've always, the thing about this album, too, is, and let me tell a little bit more of, a personal story for me, is I remember when I got this album when I was, 7 or 8. I think it was, see, my dad would have a deal with me that, when I would lose a tooth or something like that, the Tooth Fairy would, get me a Beatles album, because I would always ask for one. And I remember I wake up with my, open up, it's like, I'd have my pillow, and then I open it up, and I see, it's a Beatles album, and one time it was Help. And I remember listening to that album, I think it was the summer of 2007, and I was listening to that album, nonstop in the car. I asked my dad to play it all the time. It was one of, my favorite things to listen to, for that period of my life, I listened to that album nonstop. I wore it out on the CD. The CD's, skips, and it never got the same, but yeah. That was a problem with the CDs. Now you can listen to stuff digitally and it being fine and sounding great, and all that. So works well too, with that as well. But yeah. And another thing of what I've realized is over the years, because of course I've always come back and I haven't listened to the Beatles, even though I'm a huge Beatles fan. I haven't listened to it, them every day of my life. There are certain periods where I go back into really loving their catalog and all that. And that was in middle school. That happened, in high school, and that happened in college when, after when my grandfather passed away. It was it was hard for me to, because I was close with him and all that stuff. And, music, we did have a connection with music, even though he wasn't a huge Beatles fan. He was more of a fan of groups like the Everly Brothers and, Emmylou Harris and the country phase. But he did like the Beatles and all that stuff. So I remember, I had his car for a little while and stuff like that, that I was driving. And I would listen to, there was the Beatles Sirius radio station that I would play, but also I would play some of the Beatles songs from the Bluetooth speaker in the car, and one of them was Help, and I would listen to it, and it was a while since I really heard the record to its entirety again, and I was like, oh my god, I love this album, and it made me feel happy again. That was the thing, with the Beatles, it was they got me through a tough time when I needed it, even though in some ways I felt in some ways, of course, you can never be too old for the Beatles. But I felt like, because I loved it as a kid, it's like I want to move on. I want to listen. I want to explore something else. But I realized in that time, in order to really grieve and really go through it, I had to get through things that helped me in the past, make me feel happy and excited. And I think really honestly that's just the power of music. I think that's what makes the world go round. When we have sadness or when we have pain, we know about songs that make us happy, and when we listen to it it can make us feel great again, or it can make us just feel good for that moment, and get us through our day, So that's what I want to say of that. Other songs on this album that I'd like to talk about are You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. Now, what a song that is. That, like, it's the funniest thing, too, about, romance, when you like somebody, but she might be with somebody else, you've got to hide your love away, especially if it's like a best friend situation. If you're in love with your best friend's girl, you're gonna have to hide that there, and to mention, of course, the movie in this sense, I love the scene of how they're just playing it so simply in the book, in their house, the house that they all live together, which as a kid I thought, oh, they actually did live in that house together. But no, the funniest thing is just the way that they perform it in the film, and just it's a great song too, and of course the ending with the flute solo too. But John's voice is good on that. I think this is the point where John was was getting very comedic with his lyrics, and of course has this cynicism tone in his songs and all that stuff, and just the way he sings it is funny. Like, hey, you got to hide your love, and he sings it in such a happy kind of sense. Like, even though it's depressing stuff, like, hey, you got to hide your love away. But yeah. And John just sings it. Like I've always loved John's voice. I think John always had a great voice in a sense, and just there was always something about John Lennon that I always identified with his stuff. So especially his early days, like his early stuff was really good, because that was when he was on the ball, because we're getting to the point around this time where he was really like kind of like getting tired of fame and getting tired of the Beatles in general, because he did what he wanted to do, and it was just becoming such a such a kind of crazy phenomenon that was taking a toll, because that was the thing. It was like everybody enjoyed and knew who the Beatles were and saw the Beatles and listened to the Beatles, but they would always make the joke that they never, they were the only people that could never see themselves, that never, they weren't the group for them, they were a group for everybody else, but they weren't the love of the, they weren't the idols for them, because they were them, and, of course, I mean, at that time, the Beatles were becoming more big, the Beatles, their songs were just becoming, like, so big that Ella Fitzgerald, all these, people were using their songs and all that, because they definitely had a beautiful message to them, and when you listen back, it's still good music. You can never get tired of the Beatles. And I want to talk about some George Harrison song on the album, which is I Need You. And I Need You, I think, is just wonderful. I've always loved it. And I think the thing that's interesting is this is actually the second song that's written by George on a Beatles album. Now we're getting to the point where George is going to be writing songs. So every song now that George sings on an album is a song that he wrote. And it's great to see him, really, start, see his songwriting, really take a journey and really evolve and all that. And I Need You, me and my dad have talked about this one, and my dad always felt, and I see what he's saying, that he feels this song was like a Lennon and McCartney type of style, and it is in a sense. I think after being around two songwriters that are considered the greatest songwriters of all time, you learn something from it. And George did get a lot of criticism from even John and Paul, because they always saw him as because he was the youngest guy of the group, the guitar player. They really didn't think of him that much as a songwriter, and they really underestimated him. And he showed them, of course, throughout time. And we're gonna be talking about how his songwriting just got better and better. But I Need You is my favorite song from him on this album. I don't know how I stand about You Like Like Me Too Much. I mean, they are like I say, like I feel like when George was starting to write more, in a sense, like or in the beginning, he's had a little bit of that Lennon and McCartney kind of phase, or that little Lennon and McCartney skew or like style to it in a sense, so yeah, like that just like that element he needed, I guess, in that sense, to have, but whatchamacallit, but another another song I've loved on this album is You're Gonna Lose That Girl and Another Girl. That Another Girl is Paul's song, and of course it's comedic how they do that in the film. He plays there's a girl in it, he ends up playing her like a guitar, like he uses her like a guitar in the film, and I've always thought that funny. But I've always thought that was it's not like it's definitely an earworm. It's definitely not their greatest song, and I think it's a song you can get tired of if you listen to it like loop to loop. But no, the guitar work on that, it's a funny little ditty, and You're Gonna Lose That Girl, I've always loved that too, that John does. The harmonies, I think, from George and Paul are the best on this album. Is the harmonies from I think that's their best harmonies on this album, and definitely just it's they are in sync in this song too, especially with Ringo's drumming and all that. And let's talk about a song that John really didn't like, and that's It's Only Love. It's Only Love is a song that John looked back at, he didn't like. And, when I've listened to it, it's, definitely not one of his greatest. I mean, it's no, like, Strawberry Fields or Imagine, but it's definitely something I always, found funny and cute. But I think that's what maybe John didn't like about it, too. It was, maybe too simple, too, just, like, too peppy, too, like, too generic in his sense. Which it is, but it's still, that doesn't mean, like, being generic is always a bad thing. I mean, it still has a song quality to it, a good quality, but yeah, no. So that's what I say about that. Two other songs I want to talk about that are really kind of don't get mentioned a lot. I mean, I've just seen the Faces song that I've heard people always talk about how they've always loved that more and more. Like I love Paul's voice on it. I always, like, as a kid, like, for some reason that song always struck a chord with me, and I always just found it interesting. And I heard people singing it over time. Like, my uncle played it on the guitar a few times. I remember even in Saturday Night Live, the 40th anniversary, they did a joke where Paul McCartney and Paul Simon went up and they performed I Just Seen a Face, like the little bit memo and all that, like the little bit of that, and then like they left and then they walked off stage and Paul Simon said, "We should have done Sound of Silence." But and then another great I love, this is a song that I never ever hear mentioned, is Tell Me What You See. And this is one of the, I think, John and Paul's a fun song that John and Paul do together. Like the way they sing it, of like a call and response, in a sense, while they're both singing like the first part, and then Paul goes into like the response part where it's like, if you let me take your heart, like it's a very cute silly kind of style song, and it works well, and that's a song that you definitely gotta hear. This is an album that you really just gotta hear like in a sense. Like, yes, it's a fun album. It's not something that was so sophisticated like other stuff that we're going to get to as well, but it did what it needed to do. It had John, Paul, George, and Ringo singing their heart out, singing some fun songs. It's just a good song to just listen to, have a good time with, whether you're going to the car, whether you're going to a doctor's appointment and you need a song to listen to on the expressway, or you just want to listen to it with a few friends on a summer day. This is the album to listen to and all that. So that's it for today's podcast. Thank you very much. Hope you check it out wherever, and we'll see you soon. Bye.